Welcome, sleepy soul. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to help you drift into deep, peaceful sleep. Before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more bedtime stories. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. And if there's a story you'd like to hear next, I'd love to know that too. I never expected a job cleaning hotel rooms to change my life so drastically. My name is Elena Mitchell, and in the summer of 2007, at the age of 27, I was struggling to survive in Clearfield, Ohio, a small rundown town where every factory seemed to be shutting down, and every business I applied to turned me away because of a petty theft misdemeanor from years ago. I wasn't proud of my past, but it wasn't dramatic enough to make for a good story. Still, it closed more doors than I cared to admit. Money was tight and I needed work fast. That's how I ended up at the Hawthorne Pines Motel, a mid-tier hotel by the interstate, mostly catering to truckers and occasional families passing through. I had no illusions about the job. It wasn't glamorous. It was hard, monotonous, and dirty. But it was honest, and for now, that was enough. The morning of June 14th began like any other. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. in my small, cluttered apartment on the outskirts of Clearfield. The air was heavy with humidity, and the sky was already overcast, threatening rain. I ate a stale piece of bread with black coffee, grabbed my uniform, and caught the 6:30 bus to the motel. I didn't expect anything out of the ordinary. The front desk clerk barely glanced at me as I clocked in, and Carla Benton, my manager, a woman in her late 40s with sharp eyes and a sharper tone, barely acknowledged my presence. "Don't slack, Elena," she said without looking up, and I muttered, "Yeah, I know," barely hiding my resentment. By 9 a.m., I was halfway through my first floor rooms, doing the same routine I had done for months, stripping beds, emptying trash, scrubbing bathrooms, wiping down surfaces. Everything was mechanical, almost mindless. But something felt wrong that morning. My gut twisted when I noticed a man standing by the vending machines at the far end of the lobby. He looked out of place, stiff, twitchy, his eyes constantly scanning the area, as though looking for someone but never quite finding them. I tried to ignore him, convinced he was just some drifter seeking shelter or a lost traveler. Still, his presence left a chill in the back of my mind. During my short coffee break in the staff lounge, I casually mentioned the man to Maria, a fellow housekeeper who had been working at Hawthorne Pines longer than me. "There's this guy by the vending machines," I said. "Looks kinda off." Maria rolled her eyes and smirked. Probably just a junkie trying to get a free soda. "Don't bother yourself," she replied dismissively. I nodded, but the unease only grew stronger. By noon, the shift was wearing me down. I went back to work, focusing on cleaning rooms, trying to keep my mind busy. But when I stepped into room 214, that strange sense of being watched came back even stronger. I was halfway through wiping the mirror in the bathroom when I heard footsteps in the hall. Slow, deliberate, like someone stalking me. My chest tightened. "Hello?" I whispered softly, trying not to sound paranoid. No answer. I shook my head, telling myself it was nothing, but the tension lingered. At 2 p.m., I entered room 306, a standard double room with 2 beds and a small flickering TV. That's when I saw him again. The same man stood in the corner, mostly hidden by the shadow of the wall, but I could clearly see his eyes. They were wild, unblinking. His breath was heavy. I took a small step toward him. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual but firm. "Can I help you?" He flinched but didn't respond. I frowned, the hairs on my arms standing up. I should have walked away then, but I didn't. By 5 p.m., the hotel was almost empty. Most guests had checked out for the day, and the next wave wouldn't arrive until evening. I was finishing my last few rooms, exhausted, when I suddenly felt a sharp pain, a knife pressing into the small of my back. My body froze. "Stay quiet," a gravelly voice whispered close to my ear, the breath foul and heavy. My legs moved against my will as he forced me forward, deeper into the building. "What?" "What do you want?" I choked out, my voice trembling. "Don't make this worse," he growled. I didn't respond. My tears began to fall. My throat tightened. My limbs felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. He led me into room 308 and closed the door behind us with a loud click. My sobs grew louder. I wanted to run, to scream, to disappear, but I was utterly powerless. "Please don't," I whispered, my voice cracking. Then, in that silent, terrifying moment, I heard footsteps outside the door. Real footsteps, not his. My hope surged. "Help!" I screamed, as loud as my voice could manage. The man's reaction was instantaneous. He lunged at me with the knife, but before he could silence me, the door burst open. A burly man in a worn leather jacket charged in, fists flying. "Get off her, you bastard!" the stranger shouted, punching the attacker relentlessly. My attacker howled in rage, but was no match for the stranger. I clutched the man's arm as tears streamed down my face, my breath shallow and panicked. "Are you okay?" the stranger asked, his voice deep and filled with concern. I think so," I stammered, still trembling. The man who saved me introduced himself as Tommy Hayes, a trucker passing by the motel that afternoon. "Heard your scream," Tommy said simply. "Didn't take much thought to step in." Soon, the police arrived, taking control of the scene. Victor Langston, the man who attacked me, was quickly restrained and taken into custody. He pleaded guilty later to multiple charges, and the judge sentenced him to 15 years in prison. I thought that would be the end of it. I spent the following months in therapy, trying to piece my life back together. The nightmares were relentless at first, visions of that knife, his voice, his eyes. But over the next 5 years, the fear dulled into something I could manage. I used every spare penny to pay for counseling, and somehow I earned a degree in mental health counseling. Helping other women who suffered similar traumas became my way of fighting back. But in 2027, nearly 20 years later, I received a letter from the Department of Corrections. Victor Langston was being released early. Officially, he was no longer a threat to the public. Unofficially, the weight of that letter pressed down on me. That's why I'm writing this. To remind myself and anyone who will read it that I am not the frightened girl I was that day. If Victor ever thinks to cross my path, he's making the biggest mistake of his life. I'm Elena Mitchell. I survived. I was 15 when my parents decided to hire a live-in maid. It wasn't unusual where we lived. Our neighborhood, just outside of Manchester, was quiet, filled with semi-detached homes that looked almost identical, with their patchy lawns and brick driveways. Most families didn't have live-in help, but my parents worked odd hours, and with 3 kids in the house, there was always too much to manage. My father, David Carter, ran his own small electrical contracting business. He was the kind of man who came home with his shirt stained with grease, his hands always calloused and smelling faintly of burnt wires. My mother, Linda, worked long shifts as a nurse at the local hospital. Between the two of them, they were exhausted. My older sister, Emma, at 17, was spending more and more time with her friends. My younger brother, Daniel, just 12, was glued to his video games. And me, I was somewhere in between, awkward, restless, and always observing. So when Mum mentioned that a family friend knew someone from abroad who was looking for live-in work, no one questioned it. Her name was Waddy. She arrived one drizzly afternoon in early March, clutching a worn suitcase and bowing her head slightly as she stepped through our front door. She couldn't have been more than 25, with long black hair tied in a neat braid down her back. Her English was broken but serviceable. "This okay?" she asked softly, gesturing toward the small room my parents had cleared for her at the back of the house. Yes, of course," Mum said kindly, showing her around. "It's yours." "Make yourself at home," I remember standing on the stairs watching. There was something delicate about her, almost fragile, like she might shatter if you spoke too loudly. At first, life went on smoothly. She cooked, she cleaned, she hummed while she worked. Sometimes I'd catch her singing softly in a language I didn't understand, the notes lilting and mournful. Daniel, took to her quickly, pestering her with questions while she did chores. Emma mostly ignored her. I was curious but distant. The first odd thing happened about 2 weeks after she moved in. It was late, around 2 a.m. Daniel and I shared a room back then, and we were both still awake, whispering about some silly argument we'd had at school. That's when I heard it, a sound so soft I thought I'd imagined it at first. Crying. Faint, muffled weeping drifting through the walls. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. Daniel paused his fidgeting. "What?" "Listen." We both went quiet. The sound was clearer now. A woman, crying. Not loud, but steady, like someone who had been holding it in all day and finally let go when the world was asleep. That's Waddy," Daniel whispered. We looked at each other, unsure what to do. After a while, the sound stopped. We went back to bed, pretending it was nothing. The next night, it happened again. And the night after that. Always around 2 a.m., always the same soft weeping. At breakfast one morning, I told Mum about it. "She cries at night," I said carefully. Mum glanced up from her tea. "Who?" "Waddy. She cries in her room." Every night my father looked over his paper, frowning. "She probably misses her family. She's a long way from home. Shouldn't we ask her?" I said. "No," Mum said firmly. "That's her business. Let her grieve in her own way. Don't pry." So we left it. But it didn't stop. For nearly 3 months, like clockwork, the crying came. And then one evening, everything changed. It was a Saturday night. Around 9 p.m., Emma and I were sprawled in the living room watching some comedy show. Daniel was on the floor, eyes glued to his game console. From the kitchen came the sound of dishes clattering, Waddy washing up after dinner. My father was up on a chair, fiddling with the faulty light fixture above the kitchen table. I remember the moment vividly. Dad muttered under his breath, trying to get the new bulb in. Then he called out, "Danny, go fetch me a spare bulb from the storage room, will you?" Daniel didn't move. He was right there in front of me, his thumbs tapping away at his controller. Dad frowned, twisting to look over his shoulder. "Oi, did you hear me?" "Get the bulb." Daniel blinked up, confused. "What?" "I'm here." Emma and I both looked up. My dad's face changed. His voice grew sharper. "Then who the bloody hell just went in there?" We froze. Dad swore he'd seen someone dart past him into the storage room. A figure. Quick, definite. But we were all in the living room. "Don't mess about," he snapped, though his voice had an edge of fear. "Come on." We all followed him. He pushed open the storage room door and yanked the light cord. The bulb flickered to life. The room was empty. But Waddy was standing near the corner, her body rigid, her eyes wide with terror. She was clutching a wet dish towel, shaking. Dad's voice was sharp. "What's going on here? Who was that?" Her lips trembled. Then the sound came, the same soft, broken weeping we'd heard so many nights. My guardian," she stammered in broken English. Dad blinked. "Guardian? What the hell does that mean?" Not human," she whispered. Tears streaked her face. "From Indonesia. Spirit. Protect me." The room went utterly silent. Dad stared at her, his jaw tight. "Don't be ridiculous. If there's someone hiding in this house, I'll call the police right now." "No police," she cried suddenly, dropping to her knees. Her voice broke. "Not person. Spirit. Always with me. Protect me." Her shoulders shook with sobs. The sound filled the small storage room, making the air feel too heavy to breathe. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in my father's eyes. Real fear. He didn't argue. He didn't yell. He just said, "Get your things. We're leaving." That night, we packed hastily and checked into a cheap hotel on the other side of town. None of us slept properly. Daniel cried silently. Emma kept asking Mum what was happening. Mum had no answers. The next morning, Dad made a few phone calls. By afternoon, a man arrived at our house. He introduced himself only as Mr. Hale, a local cleanser recommended by a friend. He carried incense, herbs, and a small wooden charm. He muttered prayers under his breath, waving smoke into corners, sprinkling salt across thresholds. He hung the wooden charm above the kitchen doorway, his expression grave. "Whatever's here," he said quietly, "it won't linger if it doesn't feel welcome." After that night, the weeping stopped. 3 days later, Wadi was gone. She packed her suitcase without a word. My parents arranged her flight back to Indonesia. She hugged my mother briefly, avoided my father's eyes, and gave Daniel a faint smile. Then she was gone. We never saw her again. The house felt different afterward, lighter perhaps, but sometimes late at night, I still woke expecting to hear that soft, mournful weeping at 2 a.m. And every time I walked past the storage room, I felt the same chill at the back of my neck, because no matter what Mr. Hale said, I never truly believed the spirit had left. I never thought much about the kind of things that could happen on a business trip. To me, travel was always just another chore attached to work, unavoidable, sometimes mildly enjoyable, but mostly just a means to an end. Looking back, I wish I'd trusted the quiet voice inside my head that told me not to go. It was the spring of 2009 when my company sent me to Albuquerque, New Mexico. I worked as a regional rep for a mid-sized office supplies distributor. We specialized in inks, custom stationery, and niche paper products that independent bookstores and small publishing shops tended to order. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and stability had been my North Star since I was old enough to appreciate what chaos really looked like. My dad was a truck driver, gone for weeks at a time, and my mom cleaned houses until her back gave out. We lived paycheck to paycheck, and every month felt like a balancing act over thin ice. I swore to myself I wouldn't live like that as an adult. That promise turned into a dogged work ethic that, over time, earned me steady promotions. By 32, I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. I could afford my own condo back in Denver, a reliable car, and the occasional trip that wasn't dictated by work. This trip, though, wasn't optional. A weekend convention for small business suppliers had been scheduled at a mid-range hotel just off I-25. And my boss insisted I attend to represent the brand. I remember him saying, "Don't just sit in the back and drink coffee, Eric. Make yourself visible." Network. These events are about FaceTime, so I packed my suitcase, kissed my girlfriend goodbye, and boarded a short flight south. The hotel was exactly what I expected. Beige walls, patterned carpets, the faint smell of chlorine wafting up from the pool, and a lobby where fake plants were trying too hard to look alive. I checked in late Friday evening, grabbed a couple of beers from the hotel bar, ordered a pepperoni pizza, and spent the rest of the night watching bad cable. Nothing about that evening foreshadowed what would come. Saturday morning, I got up earlier than usual. I showered, ironed my shirt, and headed down to the convention hall. After a couple of hours of walking between booths and making small talk, I slipped out around 11:30 to grab a coffee from a little cafe across the street. That's when I realized I had left my cash upstairs. I remembered pulling a few bills out of my wallet to pay the delivery guy for the pizza the night before. When I got back to the room, I must have tossed the rest of the money onto the bedside table. I hated charging small things like coffee on my credit card. It always felt wasteful. Since my room was only 3 floors up, I figured it'd take all of 2 minutes to run back and grab the cash. When I reached my door, I noticed a maid's cart parked outside the room next to mine. The door to my own room was propped open a crack. I walked in and immediately noticed my bed had been made, the trash emptied, and fresh towels folded neatly in the bathroom. The cleaning staff had already been through. What wasn't there was my money. I checked the bedside table first, nothing. Then under the bed, between the mattress and box spring, behind the lamp, even in the wastebasket. Still nothing. A sinking feeling hit my stomach. Out in the hall, I found the maid. She was petite, probably in her mid-40s with dark hair streaked by gray and a face worn from years of hard work. She was organizing supplies on her cart. "Excuse me," I started, trying to sound polite. "Did you happen to see any money on the bedside table when you cleaned my room?" She glanced at me, confused. I realized she might not fully understand English, so I tried again in Spanish. My high school classes hadn't left me fluent, but I could string a sentence together. "Perdón. Había dinero en la mesa, al lado de la cama. ¿Lo vio usted?" For a split second, something flickered across her face. Guilt. Her hand brushed against the pocket of her apron, and then she scowled. "No. No dinero. Nada," she said sharply. Her voice was clipped, defensive. "I'm not accusing you of anything," I said quickly, raising my hands a little. "It's just, I left it there by mistake. If you picked it up thinking it was a tip, that's totally fine. I just really need it back." Her lips tightened. No robe nada. Nothing. Her voice rose as she gestured angrily, switching between Spanish and English, cursing under her breath. I felt my chest tighten. Years of playing poker with my dad had taught me to read body language. The way her hand kept twitching at her apron pocket, it was a tell. "Look," I tried again, softer this time. "You don't have to be embarrassed. I'm not going to tell anyone. Just give it back, and we'll call it even." Her face twisted with disgust. She jabbed a finger toward me and hissed something in Spanish I couldn't fully catch, but I understood enough. I was a liar, a bastard accusing her of being a thief. My patience snapped. "Fine," I said, lowering my voice, "if that's how you want to play it." And I walked straight to the front desk. The hotel manager, a tall man in his early 50s named Mr. Harlan, listened carefully as I laid everything out. He asked a dozen questions. Where exactly had I left the cash, how much, what bills, how I approached the maid. His tone was calm, professional, but I could see a tension behind his eyes. After 20 minutes, he nodded and picked up the phone. "Wait here," he said. A few minutes later, the maid entered the office. She looked smaller in the chair beside me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Maria," Mr. Harlan began gently, "this guest has reported that $52 in cash went missing from his room. He believes you may have taken it." Her head snapped toward me. "Mentira! Lies!" "Maria," he said more firmly, "is it true?" She launched into a long defense about her years of service, how she never stole, how she worked hard for her children. But her hands betrayed her, fidgeting constantly at her apron pocket. I watched her, silent, until she finally wound down. Then I said quietly, "I can prove it." Both of them looked at me. The cash I left wasn't random. There were two 20s, one 10, a single, and a $5 bill with writing on it. Someone had scribbled, "Better luck next time," in blue ink across the back. I remember because it made me laugh, her face drained of color. "One more thing," I added, my voice steady. "I think if Maria checks her apron pocket right now, she'll find the money." Her eyes flicked down involuntarily. Mr. Harlan noticed. "Maria," he said, his voice sharp now. "Show us." For a long, tense moment, she froze. Then, with a sudden, angry motion, she yanked the bills from her pocket and flung them at me. "There, take it." The room went silent. I calmly picked up the cash and set it on the desk. "Thank you," I said quietly. Mr. Harlan's jaw tightened. "Maria, wait outside." She stomped out, tears in her eyes. A few minutes later, the manager confirmed what I already suspected. "She's been terminated." "I'm sorry this happened, Mr. Carter. We'll comp your stay." I nodded, exhausted. At that point, I just wanted to put it behind me. That night after dinner with a few colleagues, we ended up at a strip club. I drank too much. By 1:30 a.m., I was stumbling into a cab, my head spinning. The driver dropped me at the hotel. I fumbled with my key card, finally getting the door open. I barely had time to step inside before I felt a sudden blow to the back of my head. I went down hard. The world spun, and then blackness swallowed me whole. When I woke, I was on the floor of my hotel room. My ribs screamed with pain every time I tried to breathe. My vision blurred. My mouth tasted of blood. Someone had beaten me badly. My phone had been knocked under the bed. I dragged myself across the carpet, every movement agony until my fingers closed around it. Somehow I managed to call 911. The paramedics arrived fast. I spent the next 2.5 days in the hospital with broken ribs, a concussion, and what the doctor suspected was a punctured lung. The police interviewed me, asking if I had any idea who could have done this. I thought of Maria instantly, but I shook my head. No, I didn't see their face. Could have been anyone, because the truth was I couldn't prove anything. Maybe it was just a random mugging. Maybe it wasn't. When I checked out of the hospital and returned to Denver, the pain followed me home, not just in my body, but in my mind. Nights became restless. I kept seeing the maid's eyes, the way they burned with hate when she threw the money at me. Was it her? Did she tell someone? I'll never know. But I do know this. People carry grudges, and when pride is wounded, it festers. So if there's one piece of advice I can offer, it's this. Be careful who you humiliate. Be careful who you corner, because you never know what kind of fury you might unleash. Hell hath no fury like a woman wronged. I thought scrubbing strangers' floors would lead me into something I'd carry in my chest for the rest of my life. When I was 15, my mother decided that my allowance had to be earned, not given. At first, she made me answer phones for her small cleaning business, something simple enough for a teenager. The idea was to teach responsibility, or at least that's how she put it. But after a few months, I wasn't just answering phones anymore. I was riding in her beat-up Toyota Corolla across neighborhoods I didn't even know existed, lugging around vacuum cleaners and caddies filled with bleach, gloves, and scrub brushes. It wasn't glamorous, but the money was better than babysitting, and truthfully, I liked being busy. By the time I graduated high school, I'd spent hundreds of afternoons in other people's kitchens, bathrooms, and offices. Over the years, my mom's company grew, and I grew with it. I studied business at the local community college while still working part-time, eventually taking on management, scheduling, and later ownership when my mom retired. That's how 20 years later, I became the sole owner of Sterling Maid Services in Lakeside, Oregon, a small, rainy town where people talked too much about the weather and too little about what really mattered. I wasn't naive anymore. I'd seen things in people's homes that unsettled me. Private fights written in crumpled letters left on kitchen counters, pills spilled beside a nightstand, toys abandoned in ways that suggested sudden loss. After 2 decades, very little shocked me, or so I thought. The job that changed me came in late July of 2011. It was a Tuesday morning when my office phone rang. The caller ID said Pearson Residence. I didn't recognize the name, but that wasn't unusual. We had new clients all the time. Sterling Maid Services, this is Claire, how can I help you? I said, flipping open my scheduling notebook. There was a pause on the line, followed by a shaky male voice. Hello. My name's George Pearson. I need some cleaning done. A house. My house. As soon as possible. Something about the way he spoke made me sit up straighter. His voice had a kind of tremor in it. Not the casual nerves of someone calling for the first time, but the kind that comes when you've already been through something unbearable. Of course, Mr. Pearson, I said gently. What kind of cleaning are you looking for? General upkeep? A deep clean? Another pause. Then, it's a bedroom. Just one bedroom. It needs to be cleaned out. I frowned, pen hovering over the page. His tone was all wrong. I could picture him standing in a dim hallway, phone in hand, staring at a door he couldn't open himself. I hesitated before asking, "Has there been an accident, sir?" The line went quiet long enough that I thought maybe he'd hung up, but then his voice cracked. "My grandson. He passed away. This morning. The police left. I can't go in there. I just can't. I don't know who else to call. My throat went dry. Normally, situations involving trauma scenes weren't ours to handle. There were specialized companies, hazmat-trained crews with protective gear and contracts with insurance. I'd referred grieving families to them before, but something about the desperation in his voice made my stomach twist. "Mr. Pearson," I said carefully, "I'm very sorry for your loss. Usually for cases like this, they want too much money." He interrupted sharply. "Thousands. I don't have that. I thought maybe your company. My wife used you years ago. I hoped you might." His voice trailed off into a rasp. I stared at my notes. Every part of me wanted to say no, to explain that we weren't equipped. But then I thought about how small this town was, how lonely he sounded, and how, if it were me, I'd want someone to step up. I swallowed. "All right, Mr. Pearson. I'll come by personally. Give me your address." The Pearson residence sat on the far side of town, in an older neighborhood where the trees were taller than the houses. The home itself was a modest one-story ranch, paint peeling in spots, flower beds overgrown with weeds. It looked like a place that once had pride, but time and sorrow had eaten away at it. George answered the door before I could knock. He was in his 70s, white hair thin and disheveled, face pale as parchment. His eyes were red-rimmed, as though crying had carved rivers into his skin. "Claire?" he asked. "Yes," I said softly. "I'm here to help." He nodded and motioned me inside. The living room smelled faintly of dust and old books. Family photographs lined the mantel, smiling children, a younger couple, birthdays, graduations. In every one, the boy in question appeared, tall, thin, with sandy hair and an easy grin. George noticed me looking. "That's Michael," he said, voice breaking. "My grandson, 17. He lived here with me." "I'm so sorry," I whispered. He nodded once, then led me down the hallway. His steps slowed as we approached a closed door at the very end. His hand trembled on the knob, but he didn't open it. I can't," he whispered. I put a hand on his shoulder. "That's all right. I'll handle it." He gave me a grateful, watery smile and shuffled back toward the kitchen, leaving me alone. I took a deep breath, pulled on gloves from my bag, and opened the door. The smell hit first. Acrid, metallic, unmistakable. My stomach clenched instantly. The room was frozen in the moment of violence. The bed was drenched in dark, congealed blood. The wall behind it bore a splatter pattern so grotesque it made my knees weak. A handgun lay discarded on the nightstand, tagged with police tape. For a moment, the sight overwhelmed me. I staggered into the adjoining bathroom and vomited into the sink, my entire body shaking. I had thought, after 2 decades of cleaning, nothing could surprise me. I was wrong. When I could finally stand again, I forced myself back into the room. My job wasn't to make sense of it. It was to help a grieving grandfather move one unbearable step forward. Still, I couldn't shake the image of that smiling boy from the photos. Now he was a stain no one wanted to face. I stepped into the kitchen where George sat hunched at the table, head in his hands. "Mr. Pearson," I said softly, "I have to be honest with you. This isn't something my company is trained for. There are health risks, bloodborne pathogens, biohazards." He lifted his head, eyes wet and furious. "Please, I can't afford those other people. They want $5,000. I don't have it. I don't care if you're trained. I can't live in this house until that room is clean. Please." The raw pleading in his voice twisted my insides. I hesitated, then pulled out my phone. I called the specialized cleaners and explained the situation. After a quiet back and forth, I offered to cover the cost myself, half from the company account, half from my own pocket. When I hung up, I looked at George. "It's taken care of. They'll be here this afternoon. You won't pay a cent." For a long moment, he just stared at me. Then his face crumpled. He stood, crossed the room, and pulled me into a crushing hug. "I don't know how to thank you," he whispered into my shoulder. "You're saving me. You're saving me." Tears burned my eyes as I hugged him back. The crew arrived that afternoon. I stayed to supervise, partly to make sure George didn't have to witness anything, partly because I couldn't bring myself to leave him alone. They suited up in white protective gear and carried in bins of chemicals and tools. For hours, I sat with George in the living room, listening as he told me about Michael, how he loved guitars, how he wanted to study engineering, how no one had seen this coming. Every so often, faint sounds drifted down the hall, the scrape of furniture, the muffled spray of disinfectant. By evening, the room was stripped bare, mattress gone, carpets cut out, walls scrubbed and sealed with primer. The smell still lingered, faint but sharp. George refused to step inside. He just stood at the doorway, staring at the emptiness where his grandson's life had ended. "Thank you," he whispered again. I put a hand on his arm. "Take it one day at a time." I never billed him, not a single dollar. A week later, I drove past the Pearson house. The curtains were drawn, a single lamp glowed in the front room, where George sat alone in his chair, staring at nothing. I parked down the street and sat there longer than I should have, wrestling with a hollow ache in my chest. For all my years in this business, I'd never felt so powerless. Cleaning usually made things better, tidier, lighter. But this? Nothing could scrub grief out of a house. For months afterward, I dreamed of that room, the smell, the stain, the boy's smiling face in those photos. Sometimes I'd wake in the night, hearing faint sobs that weren't mine. People think being a maid is just about dust and bleach, but sometimes it's about walking into the silence people leave behind and realizing that no amount of scrubbing will ever erase it. I never thought working as a maid would put me in real danger. To be honest, I didn't even picture myself cleaning houses for a living when I first left my hometown. But life doesn't always care about the paths you imagine. My name is Elena Ruiz, and during my senior year of college, I was desperate. Tuition had gone up. My financial aid barely covered the basics, and the coffee shop I worked at had cut back hours. I was behind on rent. My textbooks were second-hand copies with missing pages, and my meal plan had already run dry. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed in my off-campus apartment, staring at my bank account balance, $23.19. That's when my friend Kara mentioned her aunt owned a small cleaning service, Bright Hands Cleaning, and they were looking for extra help. I wasn't picky. I said yes before Kara even finished her sentence. "Look," she warned me, twirling her straw in her iced coffee as we sat in the student union. "My aunt gets contracts with some rich folks around Belmont Heights. They're picky as hell. You'll probably get yelled at for leaving a streak on a mirror. Do they pay on time?" I asked. "Every Friday, cash, and tips if they like you." That was enough. I met Kara's aunt, Rosa Delgado, the next morning. She was a short, round woman with kind eyes, but her tone meant business. She explained everything: uniform shirts, cleaning supplies, rules about never touching valuables or engaging in too much conversation with clients. You go in, you do your job, you smile, and you leave. "That's it," Rosa said, handing me a stack of neatly folded polo shirts embroidered with a sun logo. At first, the work wasn't bad. Kitchens smelled of lemon polish, bathrooms of bleach, carpets of vacuum lines crisp as fresh snow. The houses blurred together big foyers. Too many throw pillows, framed pictures of families I'd never meet. But then Rosa assigned me to one particular client, and that's when everything changed. The house belonged to a man named Victor Halpern. It stood at the end of Wyndham Lane, a cul-de-sac with cracked sidewalks and oak trees leaning heavy over the pavement. The neighborhood wasn't like the manicured Belmont Heights mansions we usually cleaned. It was quieter, older. The paint on the Halpern place was a pale, flaking blue. The The shutters crooked. The lawn a little too wild. Rosa only mentioned 2 things before sending me there. Mr. Halpern is private. Don't go wandering around. And Elena don't work there after dark. I laughed nervously. Why not after dark? She gave me a look I couldn't read. Just trust me. Finish before sunset. The first day I went, I knocked, clutching my bucket of sprays and rags. The door opened slowly, and there he was. Victor was tall, maybe in his late 50s, with thinning gray hair combed too neatly. His eyes were sharp but tired, and when he smiled, it never reached them. You must be Elena, he said. His voice was smooth but carried something cold underneath. Come in. The interior smelled faintly of dust and something metallic, like old coins. The living room was dim, even with daylight outside. Heavy curtains, furniture pressed close. Family photographs filled the mantel, but the faces in them looked oddly faded, like they'd been left too long in the Sunday. As I cleaned, Victor followed me from room to room, not hovering exactly, but present, always a step away, watching. You're very thorough, he commented when I scrubbed the kitchen sink. Thank you, I said softly. Students don't usually work this kind of job. I need the money, I admitted. He smiled faintly. Don't we all? It should have ended there. Just another house, another client. But every time I returned, the strangeness deepened. One afternoon, I was dusting the upstairs hallway when I noticed a door at the far end thicker than the others, with 3 separate locks. I bent down to wipe the floor molding, and from behind the door, I swore I heard something. A faint scrape, a whisper of movement. Victor appeared suddenly behind me. That room is off limits. His tone was sharper than before, almost a hiss. I'm sorry, I was just dusting. Off limits, he repeated, eyes drilling into mine. I nodded quickly and went back to polishing the banister, my heart pounding. That night as I tried to sleep, the sound replayed in my head. Something or someone had been behind that locked door. Weeks passed. My friends joked that my Maid gig gave me horror stories to tell, but I never shared Victor's name. Something about it felt dangerous. Then, one Friday evening, I stayed later than usual. Rosa had me cover an extra shift after another worker called out, and by the time I reached Victor's, the sun was already setting. When he opened the door, he looked almost surprised. You're late, he said flatly. Sorry, it was a last-minute change. I can come back tomorrow if... No, he interrupted. Finish now. Reluctantly, I went in. The house felt different at night. Shadows stretched long across the walls. The air thicker, colder. Victor stayed in the living room while I worked upstairs. As I vacuumed the hallway, I heard it again. From behind the locked door, a thud, then a muffled cry. I froze, hand gripping the vacuum handle. My chest tightened. Elena? Victor's voice floated up the stairs. I scrambled to switch off the vacuum. Just finishing. I called back, my voice shaking. But my eyes were locked on that door. That night, I couldn't keep it to myself. I told Kara everything. She frowned. You think he's keeping someone in there? I don't know, but I heard something, more than once. Elena, that's insane. If you really believe it, call the cops. And tell them what? That I'm a maid who heard a weird noise while cleaning. They'll think I'm crazy. Kara sighed. Just be careful, please. The next week, I went back. This time Victor seemed almost warmer. You do good work, he said as I wiped the counters. Better than the others Rosa sent. Thank you, I muttered, uneasy. He studied me for a moment. You remind me of someone. If I didn't ask who. Later, as I emptied the bathroom trash, I noticed something inside that made my stomach twist. A torn scrap of cloth, dark with what looked like dried blood. My hands trembled. I shoved the bag back into the bin, heart racing. I wanted to leave, to run. But Rosa depended on me, and my rent check was due. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday. Victor asked me to clean the basement, something I'd never done before. The door creaked open. Stairs descending into darkness. The smell hit me instantly. Damp earth, mildew, and something sharper. Like copper. I hesitated, but he motioned for me to go. "Just tidy up," he said softly. "I'll be upstairs." I descended slowly, the single bulb above flickering. The basement was cluttered boxes, old furniture, tools scattered across a workbench. And in the corner, chained to a support beam, was a girl. Her wrists were bound, her face pale, eyes wide with terror. She shook her head frantically at me, mouthing words I couldn't hear. My blood ran cold. "Elena?" Victor's voice called from upstairs. I panicked. I whispered to the girl, "I'll come back. I promise." Then I grabbed my supplies and hurried up, forcing a smile as I passed him in the hall. "You're pale," he observed. "Just basement dust," I stammered. He studied me for a long moment. Then he smiled faintly. "See you next week." That night I called Kara, voice trembling. "Kara, he has someone in his basement. A girl, she's alive. She's chained down there." There was silence on the line. Then, "Elena, are you sure?" I saw her, with my own eyes. Kara cursed under her breath. "You need to call the police." I did. But when officers came, they found nothing. No chains. No girl. The basement was spotless, like it had been scrubbed clean. Victor told them I was a nervous student imagining things. He even offered them coffee while they searched. They left with polite smiles, telling me maybe I was overworked. After that, Victor changed. His eyes followed me longer. His smiles lingered. One evening, as I put away the mop, he leaned close and whispered, "You shouldn't snoop where you don't belong." My heart stopped. I didn't. He smiled thinly. "Everyone makes mistakes." For days, I was terrified. I considered quitting, but Rosa begged me to finish the month. "He pays double. We need him." So I went back. One last time. When I arrived, the house was too quiet. The curtains drawn, the air heavy. "Elena," Victor greeted me softly. "I have something to show you." Every instinct screamed at me to run. But my feet followed him to the basement. The chains were back, and the girl wasn't alone. There were three now. Weak, gaunt, eyes wide with despair. I gasped, stumbling backward. Victor's hand clamped down on my shoulder. "You're very thorough," he whispered. "That's why I chose you." I don't remember how I broke free. Somehow I tore away, bolted up the stairs, out the door, screaming into the night. Neighbors called the cops. This time, they came fast and with a warrant. What they found inside Victor's basement made headlines for months. Multiple victims, stolen belongings, journals detailing everything he'd done. He had been luring in women he thought wouldn't be missed runaways, workers like me, keeping them locked away until they disappeared for good. I still wake up sweating, hearing that scrape behind the locked door. And I wonder if I hadn't trusted my instincts, if I hadn't run that night, would I have been next? I never imagined that a routine night shift job would haunt me for the rest of my life. My name is Jenna Miller, and this is the story of the most terrifying night I ever experienced. I'm currently 24, and looking back, I realize how naive I was to think that working late-night cleaning jobs would be just another way to earn extra cash during college. But everything changed one cold November night during my second year at university, when I was just 19. Growing up in a modest household in Cleveland, Ohio, my parents worked tirelessly to make ends meet. My father was a mechanic, and my mother worked as a cashier in a local supermarket. Neither of them could afford to help me with college, so I took it upon myself to work while studying. That's when I found the job, cleaning office buildings after hours. The pay wasn't glamorous, but it was decent for a college student. I worked for a small cleaning service company, and my shifts typically started around midnight and lasted until 5 a.m. The hours were grueling, but I was determined to graduate without sinking into student debt. On that particular night, my supervisor, Lisa Harper, had assigned me to clean the offices of a mid-sized tech firm called Orion Solutions. The building was located in a quiet industrial area, isolated from residential neighborhoods. Normally, the place would be bustling with engineers and office workers during the day, but after 10 p.m., it was a ghost town. "Jenna, make sure you finish the West Wing today," Lisa instructed me over the phone just as I arrived. Her voice sounded cheerful but worn out, typical of someone who had been doing this for years. "They just upgraded their security system, so you should be fine." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Got it, Lisa. I'll text you when I'm done." The building itself was a 2-story structure, mostly glass panels and sleek metallic finishes. The night was unusually silent, and the dim glow from the parking lot lights barely penetrated the vast lobby. I started my shift by wiping down desks, emptying trash bins, and vacuuming the carpets. I was used to the monotonous rhythm of cleaning, the mechanical motions providing a strange sense of comfort. Around 2:45 a.m., I was vacuuming the long corridor on the West Wing, the only sound being the low hum of the vacuum, and my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. I prided myself on efficiency, always aiming to finish ahead of schedule. That's when I heard it. A soft, pleading voice. "Help me, please." My heart skipped a beat. I froze, the vacuum still running. My mind raced. Maybe it was just the building's old pipes or the sound of the wind. But the voice was clear and desperate, unmistakably human. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling more than I wanted. "Is someone there?" No response. I stepped cautiously toward the nearest office door, the source of the voice. The office at the end of the hall had a frosted glass panel, and I could barely make out shadows inside. My hands were clammy, and I could feel the cold sweat forming on my back. "Please, help me," the voice repeated, more insistent this time. I turned off the vacuum and approached the door slowly, trying not to make a sound. My breathing was loud in my ears. I reached for the doorknob and cracked the door open just enough to peek inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. A man, bulky and disheveled, was pressing a woman in a business suit against the desk. His left hand held her down firmly while his right hand fumbled near his waist. I could also see a small knife glinting in his grip, pressed against her neck. The woman's eyes were wide with terror, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "Number, please." "Hey." My voice cracked as I threw the door open and stepped in, trying to sound as confident as possible. "Let her go. Now." The man jerked his head up, startled. For a moment, he froze, staring at me. His eyes were wild, his grip tightening on the woman. "Who the hell are you?" he growled, brandishing the small Swiss Army knife. I swallowed my fear and stood tall. "I'm calling the cops right now. There's a security guard on duty and the police are already on their way. You don't want to get caught." He hesitated, as if trying to decide whether I was bluffing. To bolster my claim, I pointed toward the building entrance. "You can already hear the sirens." I lied, trying to make my voice steady. The man dropped the knife and bolted, crashing past me and disappearing down the hall. My knees buckled, and I rushed to the woman, who collapsed into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "Are you okay?" I asked, my own voice shaking. "Can you talk to me?" She didn't respond, her body trembling. I held her tightly, offering whatever comfort I could. Within minutes, the police arrived. 2 male officers and a female officer, followed by paramedics. One of the paramedics asked, "Are you hurt, miss?" "I'm fine," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The female officer began assisting the other officers with the woman, trying to get her statement. Another male cop approached me and said gently, "We need to get your statement, young lady. Can you come with me to the hallway?" I nodded, and as I walked out, I saw my mother sitting at a desk, talking to another officer. Relief washed over me, knowing she was safe. "Jenna," my mother hugged me tightly. "Are you all right?" "I am now, Mom," I replied, squeezing her back. "Did you see who it was?" she asked, concern etched on her face. "I didn't get a clear look. He ran too fast," I admitted. Apparently, my mother had been suspicious when she heard me talking in the office. She had hidden behind a desk and called the cops herself. "Thanks for calling them," I said, my voice choked with gratitude. She waved it off, as if it were the least of her concerns. "What else am I here for, Jenna?" She smiled softly. After giving my statement, we waited while the paramedics wheeled the woman away on a gurney. She looked at me one last time and whispered, "Thank you." Tears streamed down my face. Perhaps from the overwhelming mixture of fear, guilt, and relief. The next morning, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, wondering if I could have done more. But exhaustion finally claimed me, and I slept until late afternoon. Weeks later, the news reported that the attacker was caught. He was a known criminal with a history of petty thefts and violent assaults. He admitted to breaking in to steal electronics to sell for drugs, but he never confessed to assaulting the woman. Still, the evidence was damning, and he was sentenced to life in prison. As for the woman, I never saw her again. I hope she managed to heal from the trauma. My mother continued working in the cleaning business until last year, when she remarried and left the job behind. Her new husband is a kind man, and they seem very happy. I graduated last year, determined to use my education and experience to help young people avoid financial pitfalls. I never thought cleaning houses for a living would lead me to witness the worst moment of my life. My name is Rebecca Nolan, and I started working as a maid in 1994, after my father lost his job at the factory. We lived in Riverton, Ohio, a small industrial town where nothing much happened, and people kept to themselves. My family didn't have money to waste, and after high school, I knew I had to find a way to help. That's when I teamed up with my younger sister, Megan, and my mother, Helen, to start a small cleaning business focused on helping the elderly. At first, we called it Gentle Touch Cleaning Services. We knew from the start that this would be more than just cleaning. It was about helping people who couldn't help themselves anymore. Our clients didn't need just spotless homes. They needed compassion, trust, and understanding. The older folks in Riverton appreciated it because many were on fixed incomes, and hiring expensive cleaning services was impossible for them. Business started slow. I'll admit, in the beginning, my sister and I spent every waking hour scrubbing floors, dusting shelves, and doing laundry. My mom handled the calls and schedules, always making sure we didn't bite off more than we could chew. "Becky, don't forget the corner behind the fridge," Mom would say every time I got distracted. Yeah, Mom," I'd reply, my voice a mix of exhaustion and determination. By late 1995, we had built a modest but steady clientele. Most of our jobs were during the week, while weekends were our only real chance to rest. Still, I didn't mind. I believed in our mission. Everything changed one morning in December 1995. It was cold outside, the kind of cold that makes your bones ache when you walk without gloves. I was scheduled to clean Margaret Holloway's house, an elderly woman who lived alone in a slightly run-down neighborhood on the edge of Riverton. Her house had that musty smell of old wood and fading memories, but it was always tidy when we arrived. I knew Margaret well. She was sweet, a little forgetful at times, but always welcoming. When I arrived at her home, I knocked on the door several times. "Margaret, it's Becky from Gentle Touch," I called out, my voice carrying softly through the cold air. No answer. Strange. I always found Margaret's door unlocked because, as per her request, we used a key she left with us in case she forgot to answer. I fumbled the keychain in my pocket and opened the door carefully, stepping inside. The house was unusually quiet, almost too quiet for a place usually filled with Margaret's soft hums and the distant sound of the radio playing old tunes. "Hello?" I whispered, setting down my cleaning bag. I moved toward the kitchen, my boots echoing faintly against the wooden floor. I started with the usual wiping down counters, organizing cupboards and clearing the sink. But something gnawed at me, an unsettling sensation that something was off. After about 20 minutes, I grabbed Margaret's laundry basket. It was my habit to take a small load up to her bedroom while the rest of the house was in order. As I made my way down the narrow hallway toward the bedroom, I noticed something strange immediately. Margaret's bedroom door wasn't just slightly ajar. It was damaged. The doorframe was splintered near the handle, as though someone had forced it open. My heart sank. "This doesn't make any sense," I murmured to myself. I pushed the door open slowly. There, in the dim light of the afternoon, I saw Margaret lying face down near the bed, her arms bound tightly behind her back with old, frayed rope. Her thin nightgown was disheveled, and there was a faint trail of blood on the floor beneath her. I froze. "Margaret?" My voice trembled, half expecting her to respond, half dreading it. I crouched down, keeping my distance at first, trying to suppress the rising panic. My first thought was to check for a pulse, but then a cold logic overtook me. This wasn't my job. This wasn't what I was trained for. I was not to disturb the scene, not touch a thing. I reached for my cell phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking like leaves in the wind. "This is Riverton Emergency. I think someone's been attacked," I stammered, barely able to form words. They told me to stay put and wait. I sat on the edge of a chair nearby, staring blankly at the scene, while the seconds stretched into agonizing minutes. Finally, I heard the distant wail of sirens. The police arrived first, followed by paramedics. I repeated everything I knew: how the door was broken, how Margaret never left the house without telling us, how I always came early in the morning and never saw anything suspicious before. Detective Mark Dunning, a gruff but fair man in his late 40s, looked me in the eyes with a mix of sympathy and duty. "Miss Nolan, did you notice anything unusual when you arrived?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. "No, sir. Everything seemed normal, until I went to do the laundry," I replied, my voice still shaking. The paramedics confirmed what I feared. Margaret had been dead for several hours, likely assaulted and left in that state before I arrived. The scene was preserved as best as possible, but the horror of the moment stayed with me. Over the next few weeks, the story made local headlines. "Elderly woman found murdered in her home community in shock," screamed the local paper. I avoided reading it. I didn't want to see the photos, the speculation, the pity. I just wanted to forget. 7 months later, a suspect was arrested, a man named Gordon Wallace, a transient with a long history of violent offenses. He confessed multiple times to police and his family that he was responsible. His trial was messy, but justice was served. He received life without parole. That day marked a shift in me. I was no longer naive about the world. I realized the old adage was, "True monsters walk among us." Hidden in plain sight, I couldn't rely solely on others to protect me or my family. So I went and got my concealed handgun permit. I took every class I could find, learned everything about firearm safety, responsible carry, and situational awareness. "I'm not trying to be a hero," I told Megan one evening over coffee. "But if I'm ever in that situation again, I won't be helpless." Megan, now my business partner, simply nodded. "Whatever makes you feel safe, Becky," she said, her voice soft but supportive. Even after all these years, whenever I close my eyes at night, I can still see Margaret lying there, bound and broken. It reminds me why I started Gentle Touch in the first place, and why I will never stop being vigilant. Because in the end, it's not just about cleaning houses. It's about preserving dignity, protecting the vulnerable, and standing up against the darkness that threatens to consume us all. I never thought my job would almost kill me. My name is Mara Langston, and for the past 6 years, I've run a small cleaning service company. It started as a side hustle during college, but after graduation, it became my full-time work. I've cleaned everything: private homes, elder care facilities, commercial complexes. The work was never glamorous, but it paid the bills, and I liked the steady routine. That was until early September 2025, when everything changed. I was hired by Crest Apartments, a large, aging complex just outside Hamilton. The place was old, cold. The walls were stained black from mold, and the air always smelled faintly of mildew and rust. People talked about it like it was cursed, though no one ever offered solid proof. Our job was simple in theory: power wash the exterior walls, clear decades of algae and grime, and make the place presentable again. But the truth was far more complicated. My coworker for the job was Lucas Drayton. Lucas was in his early 40s, quiet, efficient, and someone you'd trust with your life. He never said much, but when he did, His words carried weight. The rest of the crew included Caleb Vance, a reserved older man who barely spoke but worked like a machine, and Jesse Rowan, barely 20, fresh out of high school, full of nervous energy but eager to prove himself. From the moment I arrived at Crestview, I had an uneasy feeling. The scaffold, that massive, creaky structure looming over us, seemed to tremble even without wind. Every time Jesse or Caleb climbed it, I swear it swayed a little more than it should have. During one of our early breaks, I finally spoke up. "Lucas, that scaffold doesn't sit right with me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Lucas looked up from his sandwich and gave me a slow, measured look. "We've handled worse," he replied. "Just focus on your work, Mara. It's nothing new." I nodded, though my stomach twisted. That morning, the 4th of September, 2025, started as usual. "Morning, Mara." Jesse greeted me nervously as he climbed into the van. "Morning, Jesse. Ready for another day of mold hunting?" I replied, forcing a smile. "Yeah, sure," he said, his voice barely audible. We arrived at Crestview around 7 a.m. The sun barely rising, casting long shadows across the cracked parking lot. Lucas and Caleb were already setting up the scaffold, while I organized our equipment: power washers, hoses, extension cords, industrial cleaners. "Let's not waste daylight," Lucas said, his tone low and professional. I spent the morning cleaning the lower walls, my power washer blasting away decades of grime. The hum of the machine mixed with distant freeway noise, but the louder sound the scaffold's unsettling creaks never left my ears. During lunch, we ate in silence. The atmosphere was tense, as if none of us wanted to admit how nervous we were. "Have you noticed how the wind's been picking up?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Lucas glanced up at the scaffold, his eyes narrowing. "Yeah, but it's steady. We can handle this." Caleb didn't respond, his expression unreadable, while Jesse kept glancing up at the scaffold as though expecting it to fall at any moment. By 2:45 p.m., the wind was no longer gentle. It was aggressive. Gusts whipped through the lot, making the scaffold creak louder with every slight movement. "We should slow down," I told Lucas quietly. Lucas shook his head almost dismissively. "We're almost done, Mara. Just a bit longer." I wanted to argue, but I knew better. I focused on my own work, trying to block out the sound. Then, without warning, a huge gust of wind hit. A loud bang echoed metal grinding against metal. I turned in time to see the second level of the scaffold collapse, sending Caleb tumbling down. "Caleb!" I screamed, my voice raw and desperate. My body froze. I couldn't move forward. My hands trembled, gripping the power washer handle. The silence afterward was absolute. Then, the worst sound. A faint, agonized moan. "Caleb, please stay still," I whispered, though my voice was shaking. Jesse fumbled with his phone, his face pale as ever. I called 911, he stammered. I edged forward carefully, my heart pounding, and pulled debris off Caleb's legs. His body was twisted, blood smeared across his temple. His eyes half open but alive. How did this happen? I thought. "Caleb, can you hear me?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. His faint moan was my only answer. Everything after that was a blur. The ambulance ride, the sirens, the hospital lobby's sterile chill. I sat in a plastic chair, my hands shaking, unable to look away from the floor. Lucas arrived not long after, his face tense, eyes hollow. "How is he?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "They stabilized him," Lucas said slowly. "Concussion, broken arm, spinal injury. They're hopeful the paralysis won't be permanent, but it's too early to tell." An hour later, a doctor approached us. "Miss Langston," he began carefully. I stood, my stomach twisting. "Mr. Vance is stable," the doctor said. "He suffered spinal cord swelling, which caused temporary paralysis from the waist down. We're hopeful it will reverse as the swelling subsides." When I finally saw Caleb, his eyes were distant, his body motionless but warm. He tried to smile, though it looked like pure effort. "Mara," he murmured. "Thank God you're alive, Caleb," I said, holding back tears. "I can't. Feel my legs," he said, voice breaking. "We'll get through this," I promised. Exactly 7 days have passed since that terrible accident. Caleb remains paralyzed. The doctors remain hopeful, but the uncertainty hangs over us all like a storm cloud. Jesse quit the next day. Lucas tries to stay busy, though I can see the guilt in his eyes, deep, unspoken, permanent. I visit Caleb every day. He forces smiles, but I see the despair in his eyes. One afternoon he whispered, "Mara, this isn't your fault." But how could I believe that when I stood by and watched it happen? At night, the sound of the scaffold creaking still haunts me. My sleep is restless, filled with dreams of collapsing metal and Caleb's weak moan. All I can do now is hope that one day, Caleb will walk again. Please, if you're reading this, pray for Caleb Vance. He deserves to stand tall once more. I never thought that cleaning up after a death could haunt me long after the job was done. My name is Alex Mercer, and for the past 12 years, I've worked for a specialized cleaning service in Ohio. My boss, Richard Whitman, saw an industry gap when law enforcement agencies needed professional help to clean up crime scenes and traumatic incidents. Whether it was a violent car crash or a tragic suicide, we were called to remove all traces of the event, offering closure to grieving families. It was a job that demanded precision, discretion, and an iron will. That particular Thursday began like any other. The morning had been uneventful, just routine calls and paperwork. Around noon, my dispatcher, Carla, informed me of a new assignment, a suicide in a modest home in the outskirts of Akron. I felt a slight knot in my stomach, not because of the job itself, but because of the growing unease I'd felt the past few weeks. Something intangible, like an unshakable shadow, had been looming over me. "Alex, it's a single call. The family has already left and the paramedics and police have cleared the scene. The house is locked up. Keys with the neighbor," Carla said over the phone. Her tone clipped but professional. "Got it," I replied, trying to sound as nonchalant as possible. I grabbed my cleaning supplies, double-checked my protective suit, and headed out. When I arrived around 2:45 p.m., the suburban neighborhood was eerily quiet. The kind of quiet that presses on your ears and makes you second-guess why you took this line of work in the first place. I parked my van and approached the modest 2-story house. Mrs. Eleanor Hayworth, the neighbor, was standing on her porch, visibly distraught but composed enough to hand me the key without many words. "Thank you, Eleanor," I said, offering a polite nod. "Alex," she murmured, "please be careful in there." Her words were laced with something I couldn't quite place, a mix of sorrow and fear. Inside, the air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the faint odor of gunpowder. The living room was untouched, but the bathroom was where the tragedy unfolded. John Hayworth, a 28-year-old man with no criminal record or apparent mental health history, had taken his own life with a shotgun. As I surveyed the scene, I planned my steps. I was meticulous by nature. Every corner, every surface had to be spotless. I pulled out my supplies, industrial-grade cleaners, absorbent materials, and specialized equipment designed for biohazard situations. Midway through my work, a sound made me pause, a soft shuffle from the hallway. My heart skipped a beat, but I rationalized it'd be a stray animal or the house settling. I continued, focusing on my task. Then, he appeared. A young man, disheveled and unkempt, stood at the entrance of the bathroom. His eyes were bloodshot, and his face carried a mix of anger and despair. He pointed a finger at me, his voice low but intense. "Where have you been? It's been over an hour. Go clean that mess," he said, the accusation hanging in the air. "Sir, I just got here as fast as I could. I'm here now, and I'll finish as quickly as possible," I replied, maintaining a calm tone. "Don't talk to me like that," he snapped, stepping closer. His presence felt oppressive, like the weight of grief manifesting into anger. I swallowed hard, attempting to keep my composure. "I understand this is difficult, but I'm here to help. I assure you, I will take care of everything." He said nothing more and retreated into the shadows of the hallway. I chalked it up to grief. People react unpredictably when overwhelmed. Hours passed. The job was grueling. Cleaning up after a shotgun wound wasn't just about mopping up blood. It was about obliterating every trace of tragedy so that family members wouldn't have to relive it. Sweat dripped from my forehead as I worked in silence, the occasional groan of old floorboards accompanying my efforts. When I finally finished, I meticulously double-checked every surface, making sure nothing was left behind. Satisfied, I moved towards the living room to inform Mrs. Hayworth and leave my paperwork. She sat on the worn-out sofa, her eyes red from crying. I offered my condolences. "Mrs. Hayworth, I've completed the cleanup. If there's anything I missed or you notice later, please don't hesitate to call us. We operate 24/7." She nodded, trying to muster a faint smile. Before leaving, I felt compelled to mention the earlier encounter. "Also, if you could please extend my apologies to your family member in the hallway. I didn't mean to offend him." She looked at me, confusion knitting her brow. "There was no one else in the house, Alex. Just me. Just me." My words caught in my throat. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hayworth, I must have misunderstood. I could have sworn." She cut me off, her voice rising. "Please show yourself out." Her face was flushed red, a mixture of anger and fear. I didn't argue. I left quietly, my mind spinning with questions. Days later, I couldn't shake off the image of that young man from my mind. I replayed every detail of the encounter, every step, every word, trying to rationalize it away. But the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. There was no logical explanation. Weeks passed, and the experience slowly faded into the recesses of my memory, only to resurface unexpectedly in the dead of night, a chilling reminder that some jobs aren't just about cleaning up messes sometimes. They unearth ghosts better left undisturbed.